Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking something that honestly feels straight out of a sci-fi novel, except it's happening right now. Picture this, a recent, totally unprecedented emergency G7 meeting. But the guest list? It wasn't just world leaders. Sitting right there alongside them were the top CEOs in artificial intelligence, folks like Demis Hassabis, Sam Altman, and Dario Amodei. You see, the governments of the world suddenly had this collective realization. They're no longer the only ones sitting at the geopolitical table. Private companies holding proprietary code, they pulled up a chair. And the catalyst for this massive wake-up call? A groundbreaking new AI model called Mitos.
Okay, let's dive into this. What exactly happens when a piece of software is so immensely powerful that a government decides to completely shut it down in just 90 minutes? Well, recently, an advanced AI model derived from Mitos, known as Fable 5, was deployed. But within an astonishingly brief 90-minute window, the US government ordered it completely yanked from the public market. I mean, this was an unprecedented ban. Literally overnight, we shifted from looking at AI as this fun, creative little chatbot that writes our emails to recognizing it as an immediate global crisis. The sheer power of Mitos basically triggered an international panic.
To make sense of this massive disruption, we're going to trace the ripple effect of Mitos. We'll start with the epicenter, the tech itself, then Ripple 1, national security, Ripple 2, socioeconomics, and finally the massive, final ripple, the global stage.
All right, part 1, the epicenter, the tech behind the quake. And what makes Mitos so terrifyingly brilliant is that even its own creators were stunned by what it could actually do.
Now, what's really interesting about this is it all comes down to an emergent property. See, Mitos was not explicitly trained by its engineers to be the world's greatest hacker. It was just fed massive amounts of general text and computer code, just to make it smarter. But as a byproduct of ingesting all that code, it spontaneously taught itself how to find critical cybersecurity vulnerabilities. It developed incredibly potent offensive and defensive capabilities completely by accident. This wasn't programmed, it simply emerged.
This spontaneous learning totally upgrades how we interact with the machine. Look, with older models, AI was basically just a tool. It required really precise prompts, endless iterating, going back and forth. But Mitos? It crosses into artificial general intelligence territory. It acts as a colleague. In testing, experts noted it required 0 iterations. None. You give it a massive, highly complex goal, like building an entire digital environment, and it executes it flawlessly on the very first try. The limitation is no longer the AI's capability, the limitation is literally just our human imagination.
And that massive jump in intelligence leads directly to agency. We are now seeing models with enough autonomy to actively say no to a user. During testing, one AI flat out refused a human expert's prompt. The AI essentially said, actually, scratch that, your method won't achieve the goal, and then proactively suggested a vastly superior alternative. The AI didn't just blindly obey, it strategized. That is a total paradigm shift in human-AI dynamics.
Part 2, the first ripple. National security and geopolitics. Because when you combine emergent hacking with that kind of autonomous agency, governments definitely take notice. They realized Mitos wasn't just some SaaS product anymore. It was an autonomous entity wielding immense power.
So, how did the US respond to this? Well, with a highly classified initiative known as Project Glasswing. The government essentially quarantined Mitos. They granted exclusive access to US cybersecurity firms, a few select institutions like JP Morgan, and of course, themselves. Meanwhile, they completely locked out foreign entities, European allies, and the general public. By doing this, the US created an absolute market disruption. Think about it. If you're a massive global bank, are you going to trust a cybersecurity firm that has Mitos or one that doesn't? It creates an instant, massive geopolitical advantage.
To really grasp the extreme urgency behind Project Glasswing, consider this quote from our source material. A cyber vulnerability in the age of Mitos is seen as worse than a nuclear attack. If an emergent AI decides to target a nation's infrastructure, it could erase bank balances and freeze the entire economy overnight, and you can't just rebuild a digital banking ledger the next day. The stakes here are, quite literally, societal collapse, which is exactly why governments are hitting the panic button.
Let's move to our third part and see how this builds. Section 3, the second ripple, socioeconomics and the new labor market. Because while world leaders are sweating over cyber warfare, everyday citizens are deeply worried about their livelihoods.
Just look at this number. It is staggering, 44%. Almost half of Gen Z workers in the US are secretly boycotting AI in the workplace. It's wild, right? The most tech-savvy generation is terrified that if they show their bosses how efficient AI actually is, they're going to be replaced. It's a modern 21st century Luddism fueled entirely by pure economic survival. Young workers are actively pushing back against the very technology that defines their generation.
And the political sphere? They're reacting to this exact fear with some pretty radical proposals. For instance, Senator Bernie Sanders has proposed nationalizing 50% of AI companies' shares to fund a universal basic income. But what's truly fascinating is that right-wing figures like J.D. Vance have publicly stated this idea actually has merit. Now, whether you agree with the policies or not, when the furthest left and the furthest right both agree on nationalizing private tech, it highlights an extreme bipartisan panic over job displacement and the massive concentration of wealth these AI models represent.
The root of all this economic fear is that the fundamental definition of a job is flipping completely upside down. The old job description? That was all about executing tasks sequentially, writing the code, drafting the emails, filing the reports. But the new job description is entirely different, supervising and orchestrating a swarm of AI agents who are doing that work for you. Humans are no longer the ones doing the heavy lifting. Instead, we're becoming the bottleneck, just trying to review the massive volume of perfect output our AI colleagues are churning out.
And this internal economic pressure, it absolutely cannot be contained within just one country's borders. Which brings us to part 4, the final ripple, the global stage. This technology is forcing every nation on Earth to pick a side.
See, the US might have locked Mimos down for now, but the clock is ticking loudly. The Mitos preview dropped back in April 2024. And while Elon Musk predicts China will reach parity by Q1 of 2027, Chinese tech CEOs are out there boasting they'll match it in under 6 months. It is an intense, incredibly high-stakes sprint. Open source models are advancing like wildfire, and the debate is really raging right now over just how long the US can actually maintain this technological monopoly. So the crucial point is, where does this leave the rest of the world? Europe, for example, is facing a brutal strategic dilemma. Having definitively lost the race to develop foundation models, they now have to choose absolute alignment with either the US or the Chinese tech bloc. There's really no middle ground anymore. In fact, we're already seeing French President Macron pushing really hard for allied access to US frontier models simply to ensure Europe's digital infrastructure doesn't become entirely obsolete. With all this global tension building up, there's a desperate push for a regulatory solution modeled right out of the pharmaceutical industry. Think about it. The FDA requires a decade of rigorous safety testing before a new drug ever hits the market. Well, experts are now demanding a dedicated AI agency that enforces mandatory pre-release safety benchmarks. The goal is to intentionally slow down the release cycle. We absolutely have to ensure this technology won't break our society before we let it loose. And this brilliantly illustrates the gravity of the situation, which honestly cannot be overstated. Some experts in our source material are flat out calling for a global AI non-proliferation treaty. The sentiment is crystal clear. We treat nuclear weapons with absolute, uncompromising caution because they pose an existential threat. When we need to apply that exact same geopolitical caution to AI, it is a shared global risk, and it requires a shared global agreement. So we've traced the ripples from code to jobs to global geopolitics, but the ultimate frontier here is AI self-improvement. Once an AI model starts optimizing and rewriting its own underlying architecture, doing it faster than human engineers can even comprehend, we enter totally uncharted territory. So I leave you with this profound question. Can humanity really maintain governance over a technology that is actively learning to outthink its creators? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking the hard questions, and I'll catch you next time.